Hi, so I'm here to talk about all the books I read in the month of April, but this month I'm going to do it a little bit different. So instead of just talking about the books in any random order, I'm going to rank them from worst to best. Just a little disclaimer before you skip forward. I loved all the books I read in April, and I would recommend every single one of them. I also read a lot more than I usually do, and probably a lot more wider than I usually do. I don't have an explanation for that, it just happened that way. I didn't intend to read more than usual. I normally read about 4 or 5 books per month, which works out about 1 per week, which I think it's a reasonable amount of time, particularly considering how much time I devote to reading. So I don't read that fast, it's just that I spend a lot of time reading. As usual, all the books I'm going to discuss in this video are linked to in the description box that you'll find under the video. If you don't see the list with the titles and the links, you can expand the description box and you will see all of them. So let's begin with the book I liked the least last month, and that has to be Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I decided that I wanted to read some classics, perhaps 1 a month. I don't know how that's going to work out in the next few months, but you know, last month I felt like reading, or rather rereading a classic. So I picked up Frankenstein, which is a book that I've read many times, at least I think I had read it at least 3 or 4 times before I reread it last month. Of course, Frankenstein is the famous novel by Mary Shelley, the story of the Swiss scientist in the 18th century who creates a human-like creature. So he creates human life through science. The novel is set in the 18th century, but it was written, as you know, it was first published in 1818. So Dr. Frankenstein creates human life and lives to regret it. And not spoiling anything by saying that. Frankenstein is a Gothic novel. It is also considered one of the first science fiction novels, if not the first one. That's kind of hard to say. I'm not an expert in science fiction, so, you know, but that's something that people say about it. It is thought-provoking, it is entertaining, it is scary. I've studied it actually more than once in different courses that I took when I was younger. But this time my reading experience was different, because this time around I also found the novel moving. So not only thought-provoking and scary, but also moving. For example, there's this point in the novel, and I'm not spoiling anything here, when the creature, the monster, describes his experiences to his creator, to Dr. Frankenstein. I never really found that section particularly moving, or at least I didn't really remember my response to that before. But this time, last month, when I read through that section of the book, I was moved. I'm not the kind of person who cries when reading. I can cry watching TV or watching movies, but not really when I read. I don't tend to have that kind of emotional response to written texts. I do sometimes laugh, but I never really cry. I didn't cry reading Frankenstein, but I almost did. I was almost moved to tears. Having said all of that, I still think that Frankenstein could have been written differently and probably better. That's a feeling I've always had about this novel ever since I first read it as a student, and every time I had to reread it as a student, I thought that it could have been better structured. I couldn't really tell you how, but that's just a feeling I've always had, and I had it again. Not from the beginning. At the beginning, I really appreciated what Mary Shelley was doing. This novel, as you know, if you've read it before, begins with an exchange of letters. And the first time I read this novel many years ago, when I was a lot younger and I had read a lot less, I thought that was kind of boring. But this time, I got it. I got what Mary Shelley was trying to do with that, and I really appreciated it. And I had fun going through those letters, mostly because I kind of knew what was coming, although, you know, I had forgotten the plot in itself, which is another reason why I love rereading classics, because I tend to forget plots. So would I recommend Frankenstein if you haven't read it? Yeah, I had a great time reading it. I had a great time rereading it for the 4th or the 5th time. So my controversial second worst book that I read in April is Sodom and Gomorrah by Marcel Proust, which is volume 4 of In Search of Lost Time, which I own in this omnibus edition that has all the different volumes in one volume. So somebody asked me the other day on a recent video where I showed this tome, somebody asked me whether this was a good copy to have to read. Well, it's in French, so you need to read French first of all. And second of all, even if you read French, I wouldn't say that it's a really good idea. It is very heavy. The print is kind of small. That could just be my eyesight. I think it's readable. I think the type, it's big enough. It's a little bit too small for me. So what I'm doing is, I'm marking here my progress, but I'm actually reading this on ebook format. So why is this novel ranking so low in my April wrap-up? Okay, let me tell you about that, because I don't mean this to be controversial at all, I think Marcel Proust, and what I'm going to say, it's hardly original, but anyway, I think Marcel Proust is an important author. I think his work In Search of Lost Time is worth reading. Now, is it for me? Does it speak to me? I don't know yet. I feel like I need to read the whole thing first, and I'll probably make a video detailing my experience later on this year once I've made it through all 7 volumes. But at the time of making this video, I feel a big distance between Marcel and Juan, so between the author and me. Don't get me wrong, some passages of the 4 volumes that I've read so far are great, and those passages are so great that they make the whole thing worth reading, because they wouldn't make sense isolated, so in isolation, so you have to read the whole thing, and those passages are great. But other passages are incredibly boring. I have to say as well that I am not fascinated by this world populated by French upper-class people and their servants. It all takes place between the early 20th century, and there are discussions about what was going on politically, mostly the Dreyfus affair, which, if you don't know what that is, just Google Dreyfus affair. That's fascinating. That is one of the most fascinating, I think, episodes in French history and in European history, and you need to know about that. It's important that you know about the Dreyfus affair. So in this novel, that's discussed, and that's interesting in itself. Everything I've said so far could apply to all the 4 volumes that I've read so far, but I want to talk about volume 4 specifically, about Sodom and Gomorrah, because I want to say that in the 4th volume, Proust deals with forbidden passions, mostly with homosexuality. And that makes the book so much more entertaining than the previous 3 volumes to me. I was also quite surprised because I didn't expect Sodom and Gomorrah to be so explicit and to deal with homosexual characters in such a head-on and frank way. And Proust is not afraid of this. He deals with homosexual characters and what they get up to in this novel in a frank way. And it's interesting because, of course, we know now, and a lot of people knew at the time, that Proust was gay. Actually, when I said that a lot of people knew at the time that he was gay, I'm talking about his friends. I don't think readers knew that at the time. We readers know that now and have known it for one time. So that also is going to color our response to this book. And knowing that, it is interesting to notice that Proust made his main character and narrator here a heterosexual man. And that, of course, is both disappointing but also understandable given the time. I say disappointing because it feels like Proust was a bit of a coward, because he's really talking about his life and his own memories. Okay, he's making literature about it, but he's talking about his own memories. So turning this narrator, this avatar for himself, into a straight man, it is a bit of a disappointment. I totally understand why he did that. In a way, he had to do that. And in a way, he's redeemed by how he makes other characters, main characters, homosexual, and how he deals with that. So I thought that the treatment of homosexuality, both male and female, by the way, would be a lot more subtle or coded in this volume, so I was pleasantly surprised by that, by the fact that it wasn't. I think that Sodom and Gomorrah is a great portrait of what being gay in a conservative milieu at the time was like. Now, I only have 3 more volumes to read, so 3 more volumes left, which are The Prisoner, Albertine Missing, and Time Regained. I've read 4, I have 3 to go. That means that I've read most of it. In fact, you know, I've read all of this and I only have this to read, which is very encouraging. So I'm on track to finish this at some point in the summer. I'm hoping and I'm aiming for July. I say that in case you'd like to read along with me. By the way, if you'd like to read along with me, I have started making TBR videos. So just check out my TBR for any given month. So far, I've only done the one for May, and you'll see what books I'm going to read, and then you can join me and read along if you like. And also, you'll know what book reviews you can look forward to in that month or the following month. Okay, next I have The History of the Siege of Lisbon by José Saramago, which is not what I thought at all. So I expected a historical novel about the Christian siege of the Muslim city of Lisbon in the 12th century. The novel is in part that, but only in part, because mostly the history of the siege of Lisbon is the story of a proofreader named Raimundo Silva, who is working in the corrections of a book entitled The History of the Siege of Lisbon. So Saramago plays with 2 parallel narratives. So on the one hand, there is a historical novel set in medieval Portugal, which is indeed about the Christian conquest of Lisbon. And on the other hand, there is a contemporary story set in the 1980s in Portugal. The novel is from 1989, if I'm not wrong, which is about this proofreader, and it includes his romance with his supervisor at the publishing house they both work at. So I have to say that although I expected a more straightforward historical novel like perhaps his other novel Balthasar and Belmunda, I was actually more interested in the contemporary narrative than I was in the historical one. You know, for me, it is always a pleasure to read Saramago in Portuguese, in the Portuguese language, because his use of language is what sets him apart for me, and it is also what makes all his novels so consistently good. I read The History of the Siege of Lisbon as part of my monthly Saramago novel because, you know, if you've watched my videos before, you probably heard me say this. I had decided a little bit ago to read 1 Saramago novel per month. But, you know, after reading The History of the Siege of Lisbon, which I enjoyed all the books in this video, but after reading that, I think I might take a break for a month or 2, a Saramago break, because I would like to also discover new authors, and I think that will give me that space to do that. So now I'm really excited because I want to talk about an author that I discovered last month, which was the Argentinian writer Rodrigo Piglia. As you know, I'm interested in Latin American literature in general, but lately I have developed an interest in Argentinian literature in particular, and I would like to explore more about Argentinian literature in the coming months. Last month, I reread some of the best short stories by Borges. I own Borges collected short stories in this volume, so it's very easy for me to just go and read or reread any of his short stories when I feel like it, and I felt like it last month, so that's what I did. So I went online and I found a series of lectures about Borges here on YouTube. The lectures were recorded, I think, quite a few years ago for public television in Argentina. So there are TV lectures, and the presenter was Rodrigo Piglia. After watching the 4 or 5 lectures, I knew that I wanted to desperately read something by Piglia. Of course, I've heard about Rodrigo Piglia before because he's considered one of the best writers from Argentina and from Latin America. But I just never read anything by him. So the first thing I read by him was this slim volume entitled Formas Breves. This is nonfiction. It's mostly notes about literature, about his creative process, about his ideas about short stories, Borges and other things. They're all collected here. There are fragments, really. I don't think this is translated into English yet, but I know quite a few of you can read in Spanish, and some of you have asked me to talk about Spanish books. So this is not a new book at all, but it is available by Anagrama, and I would recommend it. I read this because after watching his lectures on YouTube, I knew that I wanted to read more about how he thought about literature and what he thought about literature. But after I finished it, I was ready to start with his fiction. So I started with his first novel, which is entitled Artificial Respiration, and it is available in English translation. I'm not sure if the English translation is readily available right now. If it is, I'm going to link to it in the description box. If it's not, you can always search for it and perhaps you'll find a second-hand copy somewhere. But wow, Artificial Respiration is an amazing novel. It is a novel that is, I won't lie to you, it is a difficult book. It's difficult to make sense of the novel, but it is so much fun to read. You know, I don't know if you've had this experience before, but because I know that some people, and I understand that, and I am like that to an extent myself, you know, we want to understand what we're reading. Where is this going? What is the author trying to do? That's really important. But for some people, it's also important to understand the plot, or for books to have a plot. This novel has a plot, but it is difficult to make sense of it, and that can get in the way, but not in this novel, not for me. This was a hugely satisfying reading experience for me. Why? Well, for many reasons. I learned a lot about Argentinian literature, and I was entertained throughout. Artificial Respiration, it's hard to describe. It is a first novel. It was Rodrigo Piglia's first novel, and it is, as most first novels tend to be, hugely ambitious, to the point that I guess some readers might find it pretentious. I didn't, so I'm not going to say that, but I can see how some people might find it pretentious. I don't think it is pretentious at all. So he published this novel in 1981, but he had already published short story collections before that. And recently, all his stories have been collected in one volume. So this volume has all Rodrigo Piglia's short story collections in chronological order. So I have started to read his first short story collection from the 1960s called La Invasión, or The Invention, and I'm really enjoying the short stories. But let's go back to Artificial Respiration, the novel, his first novel. It was published in 1981. It is highly political, but it is cryptic, and it has to be cryptic because in 1981, Argentina, as you probably know, was ruled by a military dictatorship. It was the last military dictatorship in the country. That means that for Piglia to be political, he could not be explicit in his critique. So the political critique is kind of coded in this novel. There are also a lot of voices in this novel, which always complicates things, and it's at points difficult to know who is talking. But then, you know, I have to say that never bothered me. I was a bit disoriented when I started the novel because of that, but then I let go and, you know, I had a great time. Not the whole novel, but parts of the novel were epistolary, so sections of the novel are composed by letters from and by different characters. So what can you find in Artificial Respiration? Family stories, Argentinian political history going back to the 19th century, discussions on European and Latin American literature. Even Kafka is in the novel. Artificial Respiration by Rodrigo Piglia, and you'll forgive the pun, is a breathtaking novel. I could not recommend it more. Okay, so we're getting close to the top now of my ranking, and next we have The Bell by Iris Murdoch. So I discovered Iris Murdoch's writing recently with The Sea, which I have already reviewed here, and I knew I wanted to explore more by this fascinating English writer. So The Bell is about a bunch of people with a lot of issues, a lot of unresolved issues, who are staying at a religious lake community in England one summer. Now, this novel is from the 1950s, but it feels, to me, it felt at least, a lot more recent than that. And if you read it, you'll find out why. And if you don't read it but want to find why, just watch my review because I talk about it then, without, of course, spoiling it. What I will say now, so I don't repeat what I said on my review, is that The Bell is a fun reading experience. And talking about reviews that you can watch on my channel, you can also watch my review of The Blue Flower by Penelope Fitzgerald, another English author. So The Blue Flower was our April pick for the 12 books for 2022 reading project. But it is not too late if you're just finding out about that reading project. It is not too late for you to read this short, beautiful, delicate, expressionistic novel about the early life of the German romantic poet Novalis and his tragic romance with a girl named Sophie. It is also not too late for you to read any of the books on that challenge. I post monthly reviews of those books, and so you can read them when you want. You could be watching this video for all I know many years into the future, and it still wouldn't be too late. You can go and find the reviews even before you read the books, even if you just want to find out what The Blue Flower or the other books are about. My reviews are spoiler-free, so just go back, watch the reviews, and then decide if you want to read along. And then hopefully you will. Okay, let's go into The Blue Flower a little bit. Just in case you don't want to watch a whole review of it, just want to hear me talk about it briefly. I know that The Blue Flower is not for everyone. I think very few great books are for everyone anyway. I can see why some readers wouldn't get into The Blue Flower. Why? Because it has very short chapters. Those short chapters often only cover one scene, and often only partially. So sometimes you just get like fragments of scene. So you have to fill in the gaps about what happens in between the chapters. And not many readers enjoy doing that. It is not a confusing novel. It is easy to follow. I don't think it's a difficult book to read, but you might feel frustrated. Or you might love it. I loved it. I loved it so much. That's why it's one of my top books that I read in April. I think it's gorgeous. I think it's poetic. I recommend it. And now we're going to go to something totally different, which is Chilean Poet. Chilean Poet is a novel by Alejandro Zambra. It's Alejandro Zambra's latest novel. Alejandro Zambra is a relatively young Chilean author. He now lives in Mexico. He writes in Spanish, but his works are being translated, and Chilean Poet came out in English translation earlier this year in 2022. The translator is Megan McDowell. I cannot talk about the translation here because I read it in the original Spanish, but I'm pretty sure the translation is good because reading it in Spanish, there is nothing that I think would make it a difficult book to translate. So what is Chilean Poet about? Again, without any spoilers. Well, it is a surprising novel in many ways because it starts as a love story between two young people, a guy and a girl, so straight relationship. But then the novel becomes something else completely, something surprising, something more original, and something a lot better than I thought it would be had it focused on those two main characters throughout, which it doesn't. Because in fact, the two characters that the novel starts with are not the two main characters in the novel. Only one of them is. Okay, so who are the main characters in Chilean Poet? Where they are both Chilean poets. So the title is a bit playful here. These two Chilean poets belong to different generations. Their names are Gonzalo, he's the oldest poet, and the other one is Vicente, the younger poet. The novel is straightforward. That's not challenging. It's not challenging to talk about it. What is challenging is to explain why I was so moved by it. I said earlier in this video when I was talking about Frankenstein that I never really cry when I read, and that Frankenstein had got me close to this, but actually the novel that got me the closest to crying last month was Chilean Poet. There is a father and son like bond between Gonzalo and Vicente, and I'm not going to spoil the novel. I'm not going to tell you why that is. They are not father and son, but they do have a bond that fathers and sons have, or some fathers and sons have. That was the best thing about the novel. But there are also other things that were good about this novel. For instance, the portrayal of Vicente as a kid, that was so convincing. Very rarely do I see children in literature who are as convincing as Vicente is in this novel. So how did I get to Chilean Poet? Why did I get to it? Well, because I had read Sambra's first novel, Bonsai, which is really a novella. He started off writing novellas or very short novels or very long short stories, if you like. Also some short stories, I understand. And having read Bonsai, which is his first novel, and Chilean Poet, which is his latest, I can see some similarities between the two. But to me, Chilean Poet is better. Chilean Poet worked a lot better for me. Now that I've read his first and his latest novel, I want to read all the novels and short stories he wrote in between. Sambra is a young author, and from the authors that are publishing right now that I've read, okay, admittedly, not that many. I don't read that much contemporary literature. I'm trying to change that a little bit this year. But from everything that I've read contemporary, Sambra is my favorite. So I would say that he's one of the most promising writers, young writers I have read in a long time. He's also a poet, obviously. So I'm curious to read some of his poetry. In this novel, Chilean Poet, there are some poems, but most of them are really terrible, and I think that's on purpose. And you'll find out why if you read the novel. But I'm also excited to hear from you, so let me know what you read last month. If you've read any of these novels, or if you'd like to read any of them, please let me know in the comment section below. I hope you're doing really well, and I will see you again very soon.